Have you ever wondered how a trained doctor could become history's most terrifying scientist? Imagine standing on a train platform where a single gesture decides whether you live or die. In the shadow of barbed wire and smokestacks, one man turned medicine into cruelty. His name was Josef Mengele, and survivors called him the Angel of Death. Tonight, we uncover the chilling truth behind the experiments of Auschwitz.
Long before the world knew the name Josef Mengele, he was simply a brilliant student in Germany. He was born in 1911 in the quiet Bavarian town of Günzburg. His family owned a successful farm machinery company that provided a comfortable and stable life. From an early age, Mengele showed strong academic discipline and an intense curiosity about science. Teachers described him as intelligent, ambitious, and unusually determined to succeed in higher education. He eventually enrolled at the University of Munich, studying medicine and anthropology simultaneously. During the early 20th century, racial science had become disturbingly fashionable within certain academic circles. Some professors promoted theories claiming that human races possessed different biological values and destinies. Young students like Mengele absorbed these ideas within lecture halls and research laboratories. At the time, many scientists believed they could improve humanity through selective breeding. This movement was known as eugenics, and it attracted growing support throughout Europe. Germany soon became one of the most enthusiastic supporters of racial experimentation. By the early 1930s, the political climate of Germany was rapidly changing. The rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party transformed radical theories into government policy. Universities began encouraging research designed to prove the superiority of the so-called Aryan race. Mengele eagerly participated in these programs, seeing them as a path to professional recognition. He completed a doctorate in anthropology, focusing on hereditary traits among different populations. Later, he earned a medical degree while continuing research in genetics and racial biology. His medical mentors praised his dedication and meticulous laboratory methods. Yet, behind these achievements, a darker ideology was quietly shaping his worldview. Mengele joined the Nazi Party and later enlisted in the notorious Schutzstaffel, commonly known as the SS. The SS represented the most fanatical and powerful wing of the Nazi regime. Members were expected to show absolute loyalty to Hitler's racial vision for Germany. When the Second World War erupted in 1939, Mengele served as a combat medic on the Eastern Front. He earned commendations for bravery after rescuing wounded soldiers under heavy enemy fire. However, a severe injury eventually ended his time as a frontline soldier. While recovering, SS officials began searching for physicians willing to work in concentration camps. These camps had become central to Nazi plans for racial purification and extermination. In 1943, Mengele received orders that would permanently alter the course of his life. He was assigned to serve as a physician at a place feared throughout occupied Europe. That place was the infamous concentration camp of Auschwitz-Birkenau. When Mengele arrived, trains filled with prisoners were already arriving day and night. Thousands of frightened men, women, and children stepped onto the cold railway platform. Most had no idea they had just entered the center of one of history's darkest nightmares. Mengele quickly realized that Auschwitz offered something no university laboratory ever could. Here, human lives were considered expendable tools for scientific experimentation. And soon, the young doctor would begin conducting experiments that would haunt history forever.
At Auschwitz-Birkenau, the trains arrived almost every single day. They came from across occupied Europe, carrying terrified families packed inside dark cattle cars. The doors opened with violent force, releasing exhausted prisoners into blinding floodlights. Armed guards shouted orders while barking dogs circled the trembling crowds. Smoke from distant chimneys drifted across the railway platform like an omen. Standing calmly among the officers was the camp physician, Josef Mengele. He looked immaculate in his pressed SS uniform and polished leather boots. Witnesses later remembered how strangely polite and composed he appeared. Sometimes he even whistled classical music while observing the arriving prisoners. Yet in his gloved hand he held a simple riding crop. With that small gesture, he decided the fate of thousands. A quick flick to the left meant forced labor and temporary survival. A flick to the right meant immediate death in the gas chambers. Entire families were separated within seconds under the cold logic of the selection process. Mothers clutched children while desperately pleading with guards for mercy. Fathers tried to appear strong while terror filled their eyes. But the decision always belonged to the man standing calmly on the platform. Survivors later described how Mengele studied faces with disturbing curiosity. He often searched for unusual physical traits among the frightened prisoners. Identical twins immediately captured his attention whenever they appeared. Children with heterochromia, dwarfism, or visible disabilities were also singled out. These individuals were not sent directly to the gas chambers. Instead, they were transported to laboratories hidden inside the camp. For Mengele, these prisoners represented rare scientific opportunities. Twins especially fascinated him because they allowed direct comparisons between two genetically identical bodies. He believed such comparisons could reveal secrets about heredity and racial purity. To the prisoners, however, the laboratories quickly became places of terror. Children were separated from their parents and placed inside guarded medical barracks. Many never saw their families again after that moment. Those chosen for experimentation often received slightly better rations. At first, this created the illusion that they had been spared, but the truth soon became horrifyingly clear. Doctors and assistants began conducting endless measurements of skulls, limbs, and facial features. Blood samples were taken repeatedly from exhausted children. Injections containing unknown chemicals were forced into their veins. Some prisoners reported waking during the night for sudden medical procedures. Screams echoed through the corridors while guards prevented anyone from leaving their beds. Even among hardened SS officers, rumors spread about the strange experiments. Yet no one dared question the authority of the camp's most ambitious physician. Because inside those laboratories, Josef Mengele believed he was reshaping the future of humanity. And the worst of his experiments had not even begun.
Inside the laboratories of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the experiments began without mercy. The subjects were mostly children who had been separated from their terrified parents. Many were twins carefully selected by Josef Mengele during the arrival selections. To Mengele, these children were not patients, but living research material. He believed twin studies could unlock secrets about heredity and racial engineering. Every morning began with long medical inspections conducted with clinical precision. Assistants recorded detailed measurements of limbs, skulls, teeth, and eye color. Children were forced to stand naked for hours while doctors compared their physical features. If twins showed even slight biological differences, Mengele became intensely curious. Blood transfusion experiments soon became one of his favorite procedures. Blood from one twin was often injected directly into the body of the other. Many children suffered violent fevers, seizures, and internal infections afterward. When the first twin died, the second was often executed for comparative autopsies. Their organs were then studied side by side in sterile examination rooms. Some experiments attempted to artificially change eye color. Mengele ordered chemical dyes injected directly into children's eyes. Victims experienced unbearable burning pain and permanent blindness. In many cases, the eyes became infected and swollen beyond recognition. Another disturbing project involved attempts to create conjoined twins. Prisoners reported surgeries where twins were sewn together at their backs. These operations were performed without proper anesthesia or sterile conditions. The children usually died within days from infection or blood loss. Guards often carried their small bodies away during the night. Other prisoners rarely spoke about what they witnessed inside those barracks. Silence became a survival instinct inside the camp. Yet rumors still spread about the horrors hidden behind laboratory doors. Some prisoners were infected deliberately with diseases like typhus or tuberculosis. Doctors observed the progression of illness while recording meticulous notes. One twin might receive treatment, while the other was denied medicine. This allowed Mengele to compare how disease affected identical genetic bodies. He believed such research could help build a stronger Aryan population. But in reality, the experiments produced almost no useful scientific results. Most procedures were chaotic, cruel, and medically meaningless. Survivors later said the doctor appeared strangely fascinated by suffering. Sometimes he watched experiments with calm detachment, taking notes carefully. Other times he seemed excited, speaking enthusiastically about genetic possibilities. Children feared the sound of his approaching footsteps in the corridor, because whenever Josef Mengele entered the room, someone usually disappeared forever.
By late 1944, the war was turning decisively against Nazi Germany. The advancing Soviet army was moving steadily toward occupied Poland. Inside Auschwitz-Birkenau, the atmosphere began shifting with growing tension. Camp officials started receiving urgent reports about approaching enemy forces. The Nazi leadership understood that their crimes would soon be exposed. Orders arrived demanding the destruction of documents and experimental records. Laboratories were quickly emptied as guards burned files in large metal barrels. Many prisoners were forced onto death marches toward camps deeper inside Germany. Thousands collapsed along icy roads while guards shot those unable to continue walking. The once powerful Nazi regime was rapidly collapsing under military pressure. Yet, even during these chaotic final months, Josef Mengele remained focused on his research. Witnesses reported that he continued medical inspections and note-taking. He appeared determined to preserve as much experimental data as possible. Some assistants secretly feared the consequences if the Allies discovered the laboratories. Rumors spread that Mengele had begun preparing an escape plan. In January 1945, Soviet troops finally reached the outskirts of Auschwitz. The SS command quickly ordered a full evacuation of the camp. Within days, thousands of prisoners were marched westward through freezing conditions. But when Soviet soldiers entered the abandoned camp, they found evidence of unimaginable crimes. Warehouses filled with personal belongings revealed the scale of Nazi extermination. Mountains of shoes, suitcases, and children's clothing covered entire rooms. Medical facilities still contained instruments used in brutal human experiments. Investigators began collecting testimony from survivors who remained in the camp. Many described the terrifying doctor known as the Angel of Death. They spoke of selections on the platform and the strange obsession with twins. Stories emerged about surgical procedures performed without mercy or anesthesia. The name Josef Mengele soon appeared in Allied investigation reports. However, by the time the camp was liberated, he had already disappeared. Disguised as a regular German soldier, Mengele fled westward through collapsing Nazi territory. He avoided immediate capture by blending into groups of retreating troops. After Germany surrendered in May 1945, thousands of Nazi officials were arrested. The world soon learned about the horrors revealed during the Nuremberg trials. Leading figures of the Nazi regime faced justice before an international court. Yet one of the most infamous doctors of Auschwitz remained missing. Investigators launched a massive search across post-war Europe. But somehow, the Angel of Death had vanished into the shadows of history.
After the fall of Nazi Germany, Europe became a chaotic landscape of refugees and fugitives. Among them quietly moved the former camp doctor, Josef Mengele. For several years, he hid under false identities inside rural areas of Germany. Many former Nazi officials relied on secret escape networks known as rat lines. These routes helped war criminals travel from Europe to South America. By 1949, Mengele had successfully secured false documents and passage overseas. He eventually arrived in the South American nation of Argentina. At that time, Argentina had become a refuge for several former Nazi figures. The government of Juan Perón was often sympathetic to European fugitives. For years, Mengele lived relatively openly in Buenos Aires.
He even used his real name while running small business ventures. Meanwhile, survivors of Auschwitz continued sharing testimonies about the Angel of Death. Investigators gradually pieced together evidence of his brutal medical experiments. In the early 1960s, international pressure began mounting to locate and arrest him. The capture of Adolf Eichmann by Israeli agents intensified the search. Eichmann had been living secretly in Argentina before his dramatic abduction. His trial revealed new details about the structure of the Nazi extermination system. Soon, intelligence agencies began focusing their attention on Mengele again. But by the time authorities arrived, he had already vanished once more. Fearful of capture, he fled across borders within South America. He spent time hiding in remote areas of Paraguay and later Brazil. Throughout these years, Mengele relied heavily on sympathetic supporters. Former Nazi contacts and wealthy patrons provided money and shelter. Despite living as a fugitive, he continued believing his scientific work was justified. Friends later recalled that he rarely expressed guilt or regret. Instead, he spoke about genetics and racial theory as unfinished research. Yet age and isolation slowly began to erode his confidence. By the 1970s, Mengele was living quietly under an assumed identity in Brazil. His health deteriorated while he avoided public attention. In 1979, while swimming near the Brazilian coast, he suddenly suffered a stroke. He drowned before anyone nearby realized what had happened. For several years, authorities did not know that the Angel of Death was already dead. Finally, in 1985, forensic investigators confirmed the identity of his remains. The man responsible for countless experiments had escaped justice in court. But history would never forget the horrors associated with his name, because the legacy of Josef Mengele remains one of the darkest chapters of modern history.
History often remembers monsters as distant figures from another time, but the story of Josef Mengele reminds us that evil can wear a calm, educated face. He was not a mythical villain, but a doctor who chose cruelty over humanity. The victims of Auschwitz carried those scars long after the war ended, and the shadow of the Angel of Death still lingers in the memory of the world.